What happens when a government, facing a crisis of its own making, tries to substitute free markets with a massive, centralized cash handout?
Well, the numbers tell a story. And it's not one of relief, it's one of economic catastrophe.
And that catastrophe is playing out right now on the streets of Iran, where decades of really structural failure are finally crashing into political reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving deep into the policy failure known as the Just Distribution of Subsidies Scheme, or JDSS.
Right.
This was a huge countrywide overhaul. The idea was to surgically remove one type of state-sponsored corruption by, replacing fixed prices on food with direct cash transfers.
And for this deep dive, we've pulled together a whole stack of sources. We have official academic analysis, we have critiques from economists, and we even looked at how this whole thing spilled over into, well, a massive information war online.
Our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to understand why a scheme which had massive government investment and this stated goal of justice, why it so quickly created more poverty, accelerated inequality, and just fueled massive social instability.
It really is a textbook case. It shows how centralized economic planning, even with maybe the best intentions, it inevitably runs headlong into the immovable reality of basic economic laws.
And the timing on this is critical. I mean, you can see this story unfolding in real time.
Oh, absolutely. Recent news reports are confirming nationwide protests, public anger erupting in, over 40 Iranian cities, all as the currency hits record lows.
And this anger stems directly from a government that just keeps trying to manage its way out of these fundamental failures.
Right. Instead of fundamental reform, they use economic control. And the JDSS was the latest attempt. It was designed to get rid of something they called the preferential foreign exchange rate, the PFER.
A system that had basically bled the national treasury dry.
It was a desperate attempt to fix a $100 billion hole. So the solution they came up with was a fixed monthly cash payment. It was, about $10 to $13.50 per person?
And here's where it gets, it's both fascinating and incredibly frustrating for the people living through it.
Yeah.
The flaw was ignoring the most basic laws of the market.
Of course. When a government dictates prices for years and then just abruptly pulls the plug, the market doesn't wait. It corrects itself instantly.
Prices surged overnight.
It's a tragic story. The failure wasn't just in the clumsy execution. It was in the whole premise of centralized management trying to solve a problem that needed a market solution.
Yeah.
They just swapped one kind of chaos for another.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. This toxic foundation that the JDSS was supposed to fix. Before this scheme, Iran ran the PFER, and by all accounts, it was an economic monster. How did it actually work?
Well, the state allocated huge amounts of foreign currency, mostly US dollars, at this ridiculously fixed preferential rate.
Completely artificial.
Totally artificial. For years, they held it at 42,000 rials per dollar, and this was specifically for importing about 25 essential goods. Things like wheat, barley, cooking oil.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds like a system designed to keep food affordable. Why was it so despised?
It was universally criticized, even by government supporters. They called it poisonous foreign exchange.
Poisonous? Wow.
Yeah. And the reason's simple. Price controls and currency manipulation like that, they always create staggering opportunities for corruption and waste.
Right.
When you can buy dollars at one low fixed state rate, but the real market value is maybe 3 or 4 times higher, you've just created guaranteed massive profits for anyone who can get access.
And those unearned profits, those are what economists call rents. For anyone listening, can you break down what that meant in practical terms for the Iranian economy?
Sure. Think of it like legalized arbitrage. The government was giving licenses to well-connected importers to get state currency at a huge discount. So they'd import the subsidized food, but then often they'd just divert it or hoard it and sell the final product at the real inflated market price. That huge difference was pure, easy profit. That's the rent.
And the scale of this corruption is, it's almost unbelievable. What do the numbers say about the PFER's failure?
Over just 4 years, the state allocated more than $100 billion through this mechanism.
$100 billion.
$100 billion. That's a gigantic sum for any economy. And despite spending all that money to keep prices low, the prices for those exact same goods still went up rapidly in the domestic market.
So the policy wasn't even achieving its main goal. The affordability wasn't reaching the average person.
Exactly. It was reaching the politically connected few. Critics estimated that a staggering 60 to 70% of the PFER benefits went straight to brokers, major importers, and billionaires.
So it created a class of super billionaires.
Directly linked to power, yes.
So if the corruption was this bad and the costs were this enormous, why did the government let it go on for so long?
That's the critical question, isn't it? One analyst estimated that the corruption from this policy was actually 18 times greater than the annual cost of the cash transfers that eventually replaced it.
18 times.
It stayed in place because the vested interests, the groups profiting from those rents, were just too powerful. They lobbied to keep it going. The government basically had a leak the size of an ocean, and they knew they had to plug it.
So it was clear. The PFER had to go. But that transition needed flawless execution to protect the most vulnerable people. What did the Raisi administration propose?
Well, the Raisi administration, they launched the JDSS in May of 2022. They saw it as a necessary economic surgery. It was designed as a targeted social safety net.
Okay, and how was the money actually allocated?
They divided the population into 10 income groups, deciles. The lowest 3 deciles, so about 30% of the population, got 4 million reals per month.
And the others?
Deciles 4 through 9 got 3 million reals. And crucially, the richest 10% got nothing.
And the goal, they called it just distribution of subsidies.
Which, in hindsight, has a tragic irony to it.
So most experts agree the subsidies had to go, but many pushed back on the method. They called it shock therapy. What did that mean, and why was it so devastating?
It meant they removed all the price controls all at once, just boom, effective immediately. There was no gradual, phased increase like they'd tried successfully in the past.
So they just ripped the Band-Aid off.
They ripped it off, and when you do that, when you remove centralized price controls overnight, you create a vacuum. Inflation immediately rushes in to fill it. It was, like you said, economic surgery without anesthesia.
And the devastation was immediate. We can actually quantify it, and the numbers are just staggering.
Oh, they're almost unbelievable. In June 2022, so right after it launched, the price of cooking oil, a basic staple, it skyrocketed by an astonishing 197%.
Wow, in 1 month.
In a single month. Milk, cheese, and eggs, the building blocks of a diet, jumped nearly 50%. For an average family, these weren't just price increases. They turned necessities into luxuries overnight.
That kind of shock has to create widespread poverty in a matter of weeks. The $10 cash transfer, it suddenly looks meaningless.
It's a drop in the bucket,
Yeah.
Exactly. One analysis predicted that with every subsequent 10% rise in inflation, another 1.5 million people would fall below the poverty line.
So the policy was guaranteed to wipe out its own supposed benefits.
It was. And that leads us to what many economists call the single most fatal flaw in the whole design.
The failure of indexation.
This is the hallmark of unsustainable central planning. The government fixed the nominal cash transfer amount. They said, you get 4 million reals. End of story.
So they gave people a set amount of cash, but with no mechanism to protect that money from the hyperinflation they knew was coming.
That's the precise failure. They didn't include an indexation element, which is a standard safeguard that adjusts payments automatically to keep up with prices. The cash was static, but the cost of living was parabolic.
So what did this mean for the average urban household? We have models of the impact over time. How quickly did that payment become worthless?
The figures are devastating. The modeling showed that within just 18 months, so a year and a half, the rising cost of living had completely wiped out the cash transfers for the average household.
So they were actually in a net financial loss.
A net loss compared to before the reforms. They endured the shock, they got a small, fixed amount of cash, and then less than 2 years later, they were worse off than they were under the corrupt PFER system.
Unbelievable. Even for the poorest groups.
Even for the poorest deciles. They got a momentary, tiny boost in purchasing power, and then they lost all of it within months. The government failed to control the inflation they unleashed.
The scheme was called just distribution. But looking at the social fallout, did it achieve justice, or did it just create new, maybe even more insidious forms of inequality?
It failed profoundly. What happened was the high inflation environment, which was guaranteed by the shock therapy, it became the new engine of inequality.
How does that mechanism work?
Well, you have to look at how different groups react to high inflation. The wealthy, who already hold a staggering 62% of the country's wealth, they protect their assets.
Right, they buy gold, real estate, foreign currency.
Exactly, things that hold their value. These assets actually grow in nominal value as the currency collapses, so their real wealth is preserved or even increases.
So inflation acts as a wealth preservation tool for the elite.
Absolutely. But meanwhile, the poorest half of the population, they have no real assets to hedge against inflation. They become the main losers
Because their limited savings and that static cash transfer just get destroyed.
instantly. The JDSS replaced a system where elites stole currency with a system where inflation ate the poor's cash. The inequality just shifted forms and it grew even wider.
And beyond the economics, the government had this huge problem with public trust. A survey showed that over 60% of people had negative attitudes toward the reform.
That skepticism was entirely earned, and it made the policies targeting errors even worse.
How so?
The JDSS was supposed to be pro-poor, but vulnerable groups like refugees and illegal immigrants, they were just excluded entirely because the state's welfare databases were incomplete. You can't have just distribution if your data is flawed.
And even when the money did reach people, it didn't always help them afford food, which was the whole point.
That's right. The instability was so severe that people immediately diverted that money to cover other massive increases, like soaring housing costs. They were just trying to keep a roof over their heads.
Okay, let's shift to the digital battleground.
Yeah.
Because when an economy collapses like this, social media becomes weaponized.
It does. And what's fascinating is the data analysis from Farsi Twitter. It shows that highly polarizing, divisive political discussions, like those around mandatory hijab laws, show signs of intense manipulation.
So you're talking about bots and trolls being deployed to push a state narrative while people are struggling to eat.
Precisely. The data shows that the most influential accounts in these divisive debates are 1.94 times more likely to be suspended for inauthentic behavior compared to users in non-political discussions.
So almost twice as likely to be fake.
It points directly to a coordinated effort to dominate the public discourse.
And what kind of language were these accounts using? What narrative were they pushing?
They used highly partisan language aligned with the conservative state agenda. Words like lawlessness, dignity, norm. The goal is to shift the focus away from the failed economy and onto issues of social control.
And were these messages just being broadcast everywhere, or were they contained?
They were operating in isolated echo chambers. The analysis showed that the friendship and retweet networks overlapped heavily, so users were only exposed to one highly partisan perspective, which was being amplified by all these inauthentic accounts. It effectively drowned out any real debate about the economic failure.
So what does this all mean for the listener? We saw the Iranian government try to perform major economic surgery, the JDSS, and the prognosis was, well, predictably terrible.
The government replaced one deep structural system of corruption with another, equally corrosive source of economic instability: non-indexed cash transfers and catastrophic shock inflation.
The outcome was swift and devastating. Any potential gains for the poor were erased within months. It accelerated inequality, enriched the asset-holding elite, and fueled a digital information war to suppress popular anger.
Yeah, the lesson here is clear. Centralization and aggressive price fixing, even when you wrap it in the language of just distribution, it rarely overrides the laws of economics.
Right.
When the state fails to control the inflation it creates, it's the most vulnerable who bear the brunt. That leads directly to distrust and social instability. The JDSS is just a prime example of a government trying to manage symptoms while ignoring the disease.
So, given that the richest 10% of the Iranian population controls 62% of the wealth, and fixed cash transfers are guaranteed to be eaten by inflation, what structural reforms, beyond just subsidy adjustments, are truly required? Things like fundamentally reforming the budgeting, banking, and taxation systems to establish actual lasting justice and economic stability. That's the difficult question that centralized economic control continues to try and silence.